Hello, friend. It's good to see you again. I'm sorry it has taken me so long to make another video, but since my last video, I've been struggling as I've been thinking quite a bit about a serious phenomenon in the American church and in America altogether. I've been hearing quite a bit on this word deconstruction as it relates to Christians and also as it relates to those who would call themselves either atheist or agnostic, especially those who were once professing Christians and have now become self-professed atheists or agnostics after beginning to think critically about their prior profession. Now, as I listen to them, and I really want to listen to them, and I'm learning much from them and much about what's going on today in evangelical circles, and some of the troubling things that I hear, I find out they have some very valid reasoning behind their decisions, calling their experience a deconstruction experience. But I have also listened to those and continue to listen to those who have been professed Christians for many years and have also gone through what they would call a deconstruction process or deconstruction experience, and still profess Christ, but have now begun to embrace a new way of understanding the Bible and biblical theology. I find this quite interesting and in line with my own experience, really. In other words, they began somewhere along the line or along the way for some reason, whether a life experience or other influencing experience, to begin to look at themselves, to look at the Bible, to look at the church, and their understanding of what they believe critically. They began to think critically about what they believe. And I think that's so very important. And to think in a new light. In other words, what they had grown up with in evangelical Christianity and what they had been taught all their lives, they themselves confess, for them began to break down and just didn't work for them nor their worldview anymore. And they began to search just what they were taught to believe, taught about the Bible itself, as well as other interpretations of the Bible applied to real life experience, and found out it led to a dead end and down a path to personal as well as societal destruction. Now, not the Bible itself, but what they were being taught about the Bible is what led to this breakdown of their worldview and how it didn't work at all. It either caused them to leave the faith altogether or embrace a new biblically theological Christian position for the outworking of their faith. Therefore, in these next few short videos, I can't do it all here, I would like to address this very important issue biblically, as well as share my own viewpoint, insight, and experience with this. First of all, let me begin by saying I personally believe strongly in biblical Christian deconstruction. I've never used that word deconstruction, but I am now because I'm seeing that it is a word that is being used contemporarily or contemporaneously in our day-to-day about what I just discussed previously, as it's called today, which involves a simple, or what I would call a simple examination, a critical examination of what one believes, why they believe it, and what it offers and benefits that person and society as a whole, as well as many other facets. Now, the Apostle Paul literally says in 2 Corinthians chapter 13, I believe it's chapter 13 verse 5, to these very fickle Corinthians, he says, "Examine yourselves, whether ye be in the faith. Prove your own selves. Know ye not your own selves how that Jesus Christ is in you, except ye be reprobates?" And we're going to touch on this a little bit more later in another video. We're going to look at this biblically. We're going to find out that the Bible has much to say on this. Now, Paul is literally telling these believers to look at themselves, examine themselves, think critically about themselves and what they believe, and how this affects how they live among and in society. Now let me say that I believe strongly in deconstruction, as it is called today, in order for a healthy Christian to experience growth. To experience and grow, if you will. I believe one of the greatest problems we have, especially with middle-aged and older Christians in this American society today, in this evangelical society, is that they have never really had anything shake them enough to make them believe there might be something wrong with their belief system. And their professed faith has become stagnant and a stench, literally, in God's nostrils, as well as those who have to live with and around them. Now that's pretty strong, but let me continue, please. This is also why I believe such a large majority of them, around 80%, voted for a criminal, a sexual abuser, a rapist of women and young girls, a fraud, a felon, a liar, an extreme racist and bigot to lead the nation, and somehow give strength to them, these 80% of evangelical America, to continue in their racism and bigotry, which really underlies a permission structure they enjoy to hate, to also commit some of the most heinous acts of physical and sexual abuse to spouses, children, and others. So that what they would say is, so the church can grow, be promoted in the world, become strong, and reach millions with the gospel, right? Friends, there's something wrong with this fundamentally. And no surprise, the exact opposite is what has happened. The church is so weak right now that many young people are questioning what they're being taught. Many young people in this church, in this church movement, in this evangelical movement today. And many are turning to atheism, friends. Quite frankly, I gotta confess, I don't really shudder at this. And you're going to really be amazed when you hear this. Me being a Christian, I am somewhat encouraged to see it. It's about time something happened in this area to begin to shake the organized evangelical church today to its foundations. So before I begin to get into the biblical aspect of Christian deconstruction, I would simply like to briefly share with you my own experience of deconstruction, which I never really knew as such when I experienced it. I would say I experienced deconstruction about probably 3 major times, many times, but 3 major times during my Christian journey. And no, I did not turn atheist. Not that I couldn't have, but it did not work that way for me. And in a later video, I will try to explain why, so as to maybe give some guidance to those who feel the same way, or maybe are struggling with what they are going through and where it might end. First of all, I do not condemn the atheist or the professed Christian who turned atheist, but rather I hear them. And actually, I've been listening to them more and more, and it's quite interesting, their testimonies. I actually embrace them as fellow human beings in the human journey. Now, to some Christians out there, that may sound antithetical to Christianity and the Bible, but not at all. In fact, it is really very Christian and biblical to identify with all humanity, and yet somehow, supernaturally, if you will, see the true need and minister to that human need and affliction in humanity, bringing healing and justice, resulting in peace and well-being of human society, as well as salvation, eternal rest and peace with God and with each other. In fact, I would like to show how the gospel itself, the very gospel that Christ died for our sins, was buried and was raised from the dead the 3rd day, the very gospel which I believe in fully contains the justice of God for humanity, which brings eternal peace to the human soul as well as to human society. I would also like to speak on a real human emotion. Fear. That word fear is being talked about quite a bit, and show how fear is used in the cult of Christendom to control people, rightly alleged by the atheist as to why one would turn to atheism, but also how the emotion of fear can be used in, or how it plays a healthy role in one's conversion. Now, we hear a lot of negativity about fear, the emotion of fear, and how it's used to control folks, but I would like to also be fair with this word and look at how this emotion can play a healthy role in one's conversion and biblical deconstruction. Now, I can't do that here. I have to do this in a future video. I just touch on that here. Now, my first personal deconstruction experience was at around the age of 13, when I was in what is called confirmation. I was baptized and raised and taught in the Lutheran Church. The process of what is called affirmation of baptism or confirmation, and I can't elaborate on that here, usually begins around the age of 12, 13 or 14. It was at this point in my life where I began to have questions about what I was learning and being taught. I had a wonderful pastor who really cared for my soul, yet with all his teaching me the catechism, the 10 commandments, the sacraments of baptism, the Lord's Supper, and all it meant, I knew I was missing something. And that something seemed to be, something just didn't seem to be right. In other words, I was taught that Lutherans believed that one was saved by the grace of God, and yet I was being taught, it seemed, a works salvation, and I just didn't have the assurance of my salvation as to whether I had peace with God and what that meant. I don't think I really understood the gospel of salvation. And when I look back on this experience, that the gospel of my salvation, which is that Christ died for my sins, was raised the third day from the dead according to the scriptures, I knew enough about heaven and hell, not a whole lot, but enough, which was, very little, but enough to be fearful, let me use that word fearful, of what would happen to me if I was to die. To make a long story short, my conviction led me to hear and understand the gospel and believe on the risen Christ. And for a short period of time, there was peace in my heart that I was saved. Now, this deconstruction experience would be called conversion by many, and I would not disagree with that at all. But conversion or not, there had to be a dismantling or questioning of that which had been built in me, namely a religion about Christ, if you will. And some barriers had to be broken through and broken down in order for me to actually begin to understand what it really meant to experience salvation. Now, this is exactly what had to happen to Paul, the Apostle Paul, when he was converted. We read of his deconstruction experience, and he talks about deconstruction very briefly in Galatians chapter 2, verse 18. And again, I can't elaborate on that here, but which effectively was his first deconstruction experience, which we would properly, of course, call conversion. Now, Paul was steeped in religion, a religion that had been given to his people, the Jews, directly by God through Moses, a religion he deeply believed but could never bring peace to him. Notice what he says in Galatians chapter 2, verse 18. He says, "For if I build again the things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor." You see, there was a deconstruction process. You see, the things he destroyed, he quantifies in Philippians chapter 4, verses 3 through 6. And then in verse 7, he says, "But what things were gain to me, those I counted loss for Christ." There was a deconstruction in his life in order for him to recognize his need for Christ alone. Now, I touched on this, but would like to devote more time to this in a future video. My second deconstruction experience came later in life. This experience was not one of conversion nor of salvation, but rather one of sanctification and growth. Now, fear again was involved, but not a fear necessarily imposed on me by a movement or a person, but rather by experiences I was having. I began to have a conviction to learn the Bible, to read and understand the Bible, to see just what it said about what I was learning and believing and living. how I lived out my faith, and how I communed with those who identified with the same denomination I did, I began to slowly learn that my view on the Bible was not quite correct, as I was being taught a works salvation and also a works sanctification. As I began to read and study the Bible along with good exposition on the radio, I began to better understand the grace of God and the way God wants me to live. But unfortunately, because of human influence involved in this teaching, I began to look for a bubble, as we all do, that nursed that particular theology, which brings me to my last deconstruction experience. Now, after about 25 years of reading and studying the Bible and being involved with and listening to conservative Bible teaching and preaching, I turned extreme to extreme, or Bible teaching that actually turned extreme conservative teaching. I began to see the Bible only as that which a right-wing conservative Christian could actually embrace truly. In fact, if one did not embrace the Bible the way I thought they should embrace it, I actually thought that person was not a Christian. I did not realize I was becoming extreme in my theology and treatment of others. I moved farther and farther right in my theology due to my continual consumption of conservative Christian Bible teaching and preaching, which I was wholesale sold out on, and shaped my worldview more and more extremist, to where I followed along with the extreme view that God's love can only be shown to the unbeliever by giving the unbeliever the gospel. And if he does not accept it, then you are not obliged or obligated to show him or her the love of God until they accept it. Even though I was troubled by this, as I saw it did not quite work very well anywhere I went, I still believed it was the right way to go, and it was just that we were living in the last days of the apostasy, and Jesus would be coming at any time to take his church off this earth. This philosophy worked until around COVID. Things started to drastically change, and I saw some major shifts in what I thought was Christianity. I never had time to listen decently to any form of truthful media except the short clips from the Bible Broadcasting Network on the car radio of SRN News, Salem Radio News, which just magnified Trump and his policies. They were lying, and I was believing them. It actually is almost unbelievable how even a Christian, if that is all they hear, as far as the world scene goes, can be completely duped and deceived by right-wing media. I don't have a lot of time to go into it on this video, but because I had to work from home during COVID, I accidentally found some independent media which began telling me things completely contrary to what I was listening to, almost exactly opposite. And it seemed true because the governor in my state was doing away with all COVID restrictions during COVID, during the height of COVID. And my wife, who is a school teacher, was right in the middle of it and in danger of getting COVID. Now, the more I listened to independent media, the more I found out I was wrong, almost completely wrong. And it caused me to begin listening to other more liberal viewpoints on what was happening. My new worldview was not shaping how I understood the Bible, but it was causing me to read the Bible and see God in a different light and perspective, as well as looking at justice in a new way. Social justice, that is. And you know, the Bible has a whole lot to say about social justice. I mean, a whole lot to say. A whole lot that I just willfully skipped and missed, because that's not what right-wing conservative theology wants you to key up on. Although the Bible has a lot to say on it and actually does want the believer to key up on it. Now, I have to cut off here for now, but would like to elaborate just a little more next time when we join again. In short, I began to deconstruct from the rigid, hateful, legal person I was and see humanity in a different light. Maybe a little the way Jesus might have seen it. I had much help along the way, but not from any of the conservative churches I attended, but actually from some Christians on video series who were going through what I was going through. I actually had to leave the conservative evangelical movement, which I believe and know now is going the wrong way.